This time in the Magic Kitchen, we're talking about terminology, sayings, and greetings in witchcraft.
I'm Leandra Witchwood.
And I'm Elyse Wells.
And welcome to the Magic Kitchen podcast, where we talk about magic, kitchen witchcraft, herbs,
and everything in between.
Blessed be. Merry meet.
Yes, this is what we're talking about. We had a listener send in this question. They said they hear a lot of different greetings in witchcraft. And our podcast, of course, ends with one. Merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again.
Merry meet again.
And we wanted to just do an episode to talk about some common sayings you'll come across. Some are less common than they used to be. It's a little witchcraft history for you. And also, you know, what they mean and how you can use them if you're comfortable too. And a little bit about their origins if we know it, because sometimes they just sort of came up. We don't know. Maybe that person heard it first. Maybe they said it first. Who knows?
We just start using it.
Just like any language, any word in any language, I should say, I guess. That's how words, I always say that when I see a new word being added to the dictionary, I'm like, what the heck? You can't just make up words. And then I think to myself, wait, that's right.
All words are made up.
All words are made up.
All of them. Every single one of them. Well, and an interesting fact, like the Korean language is completely made up by their emperor. So, you know.
What?
Hey.
He personally was like,
it. Let
me just
I don't remember when.
on this?
I don't remember which emperor. Yeah, it. We'll have to like link some documentation or something, but the Korean language was made up by one of their emperors. Yeah.
That's wild.
Because he was a linguist and I guess he wanted his own language. So really cool stuff. So yeah.
Well, I mean, that's why Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings as a backdrop for his language he invented. So
yep. He made up his own languages too. And okay, another fun fact, I actually am trained to speak Quenya. I haven't spoken in many years, but the coven that I was trained in, we used Quenya. Which only has about 900 words, so it's not a full language, but we would use that in our spell work. I do, and I still, to this day, use it.
Love that. I studied Sindarin. I had a teacher who was, which let's back up for those of you who are like, oh my God, what are you talking about? In Lord of the Rings, you've got two kinds of elves, essentially, and they have two dialects. Yes. And there's Quenya, which is like the more ancient high elven language. And there is Sindarin, which was in the time of the Third Age, in the time of the Lord of the Rings, the common elf tongue at that time. Yep. And Tengwar, if you've heard that word, is what is referring to the lettering.
Alphabet. Yeah. Yep. And so to give you some context, Galadriel would speak Quenya and Legolas would speak Sindarin.
Perfect.
So there's where you get their different languages. And then Elrond, who was half elven, he spoke all of it.
Yeah. He's like, you know, scholarly. He's got the Hall of Fire, so he's out there. He's reading books.
Yes.
He's writing scrolls. Yes. He knows it all.
Yeah, where Galadriel has Nenya, so she's water.
Oh, I'm peeling it back right now. Like, I could just keep going. Okay. Actually, we got a comment from a listener.
Okay, this is not a Lord of the Rings episode.
Maybe it should be.
I don't know. Oh, man. No, we'll leave that to the prancing pony.
Yeah. We had a listener message me on Instagram talking about the Spirit of Place episode and that it really resonated with them. And they're actually buying land in New Hampshire, 30 acres, and they call it the Shire. And they said they really appreciated my Ent reference in that episode. And I said, all right, you know what? I'm going to lean in. I'm going to lean in a little bit, but not too much because it could get bad. Like, we will just change the whole trajectory of this podcast. We'll never talk about anything else ever again.
No, we will never talk about the topic that we're supposed to talk about. So let's get into it. Okay.
Yeah. So, all right. So
perfect love and perfect trust. Let's go.
Let's start there. So in many traditions, and I want to say want to say Wicca probably started the use of this, but I know Aleister Crowley said it too, ironically, because that man didn't really understand consent. So that's not perfect love. But anyway, perfect love and
but
perfect trust.
It goes deeper than that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a deeper saying than it sounds. It sounds a little poetic and flowery, and it is, but it also is very real. And I didn't really fully get this one until I went through my initiation with my coven, and it just clicked for me. And perfect love is the idea that you are connected perfectly to the universe. There's a perfect love between you and spirit. And this is an important thing to grasp, because people often, we talk about this often too, they have a fear of messing up, of insulting deity, of not being good enough for deity. Yeah. And when we can fully internalize that it's about perfect love between each other, between us and that deity, those fears go away. That judgment we place on ourselves, because that's what it is. It's not deity. Deity is not saying, you poured that a little wonky. Hey, give me another one. Like, no, they're happy for the libation. They're happy for the time spent. They're there for the acknowledgement.
Seriously, you only gave me grape juice. I wanted wine. Like, they're not like that. Sorry.
No. So that's it. That's perfect love. And it's this transcendent feeling when it hits you. And it can happen at home in a meditation. It can happen on a full moon as you're pouring libation. It can happen at a public ritual. You know, it's your local fairy festival. It can happen when you're listening to a podcast and you're doing the dishes, and all of a sudden you see a butterfly out the window and you realize you're connected to what's around you. And that's perfect love. And perfect trust is the extension of that, because trust is the result of feeling full love from and within yourself and without in the relationships you have.
Yeah. And in my own experience, when I was being taught about perfect love, perfect trust, first it was from books, and it was kind of a vague description of it. You know, you're trusting in the universe, or you're trusting in your magic, you're trusting in your group or whatever. And then when I got into a group where I was heavily, it was the first group where I was being taught, quote unquote, because I use that very loosely with this first group that I joined. The idea of perfect love and perfect trust was a manipulation tactic. So I didn't fully understand what it meant, because our priestess at the time was using it as a tactic to say, well, you need to trust me wholly. You needed to just have perfect love and perfect trust for me as your leader. And that never sat right with me, but because I was young and ignorant, I don't want to say stupid, because we're not stupid. We're just trying to mold ourselves to fit in rather than being fully accepted. And that happens to a lot of us when we're starting out. And this idea that you need to fully trust someone that is fallible, like a human, is a red flag. So when I was learning perfect love and perfect trust from this priestess who wanted us to perfectly love her and perfectly trust her without question, I should have run away at that moment, but it was a learning experience. I had to learn the hard way. And I didn't realize it until later, when I was actually a priestess in my own coven, that perfect love, perfect trust really was deeper than that. It was trusting that I was infinitely connected to Source, that Source has my back, that I don't have to worry when it comes to achieving my goals and prosperity and that sort of thing, because as long as I was dedicated to my path, dedicated to the process, everything was going to work out the way it needed to work out.
Yeah. We love getting your stories and hearing your experiences. And we are planning a listener-led episode all about how witchcraft changed your life. And we're using this service. It's totally free. It's really easy. No accounts or anything like that, called SpeakPipe. And the link to that is in the description, but you also can just go to speakpipe.com and search Magic Kitchen Podcast. And it's a way for you to leave an old-fashioned voicemail telling us your story. How did witchcraft change your life? And once we have a lot of these collected, we're thinking we'll probably collect these through the next month and then record an episode in June where we'll take these voice memos. So you'll hear yourself on a Magic Kitchen podcast episode. So we're really excited to do that. I think it's going to be a way to really build community with everybody, even if you're a listener, but you're not on social media. This is a way to do that, to join us. So I hope you'll take just 30 seconds to a minute. It does not have to be long, to just tell us, how did witchcraft change your life? What was that moment of magic when it really felt real? Or what was the experience that you knew you were a witch? Or maybe you got into witchcraft for something and it worked. Whatever that problem was, it fixed it. And now you feel more empowered. How did witchcraft empower you? So take some time, go to speakpipe.com/Magic Kitchen Podcast or follow the link in the description and send us your thoughts on that question. How did witchcraft change your life? Another term you're going to hear a lot is the rule of three. People will say that, or the threefold law. And what that means is whatever you do will be returned to you 3 times. So I've also heard somebody say before, like the tenfold rule, but the idea is karma, essentially, that whatever you do right now, if you do a spell to invite wealth, for yourself, and that is returned to you 3 times, that would be a good thing. But if you do a curse on somebody and that's returned to you 3 times, now maybe that's not worth it. So It's a way for you to work through the consequences and think about what you're doing and if it's worth the consequences or not.
Yeah. And also, when we work in magic, we often work with sacred geometry and we're not aware of it because we're not being taught that by books or maybe even your high priestess or just on your own. You're not realizing it. But the significance of 3 is important in magic. The numbers 3, 6, and 9 don't always show up regularly, especially in that sequence, 3, 6, 9. When we cast a circle, we do it 3 times, 6 times, or 9 times. When we look at the sacred geometry of a labyrinth, 3 circuits, 7 circuits, we always have these like odd numbers, but 3, 6, 9 doesn't always show up. And it is a sequence that is vibrationally aligned to kindness, to service, to abundance, to communication, and creativity and joy. So that's another significance to, things coming back to you threefold, because whatever you are sending out there, you're going to attract back to you. And that's, basic stuff. It's basic quantum physics. It's basic, what is it? The secret to law of attraction. And really all of this stuff is just magic as our ancients have known it, just rebranded to have another name and another perspective. And so 3 numerals of 3 or multiples of 3 are very significant in magic. And it has nothing to do with angel numbers or numerology specifically, like the way we typically see it. But it has a lot to do I can't tell you where the origination came from, but it's old. It's very old.
So actually, I can, because I happened to listen to a lecture by Isaac Bonowitz, Hail the Traveler. Hail the Traveler is also an expression. It means
another one,
farewell to the dead. It's like rest in peace in a druidic context. It's coming from that group of people. But Isaac Bonowitz was a teacher and a really revolutionary man. He unfortunately died in 2010, but he invented, I don't know, that's not the word. He started the organization for an anti-defamation league for pagans. So he was the first person to say, we're an active religion and we deserve to be seen as such. In the 70s, he started the Aquarian Anti-Defamation League. And he also began something called the ADF. And it's an Irish name. I'm not going to say it right. It's Ar Dreneg Fain. And it means our own type of magic, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm translating that wrong. If we have any ADF listeners, please email us and let us know, because I'd love to have you on to talk about it. Because this has been my rabbit hole that I've been going down. Because long story short, what I love so much about Isaac Bonowitz and what he riffed on in the 70s, he saw Druids beginning. They began in the 40s, just like Gardneri and Wicca did. So the 40s was this huge resurgence of, discarding the patriarchal beliefs of the late 1800s and welcoming in the goddess and women to the circles. And, slowly but surely, we got to where we are today. And I actually did a whole workshop on the history of witchcraft, and that recording is available on seekinglumina.com. So you can find it there or message me if you can't find it. Anyway, the rule of 3 dates back to our ancestors, the primal people called the Indo-Europeans. And the Indo-Europeans, they first descended from around Eastern Europe. That's a very vague answer, but they think it was the Eurasian steppes, so like the base of the Ural Mountains, 6,000 years ago. And they made their way not only all the way out west to where we think of as Anglo-Saxon territory and the British Isles, so like Druid people came from the Indo-Europeans, but also the Greeks and the Indians, people from India. So when Hitler was going on his whole thing about the Aryan race, he was just extraordinarily mistaken. But what he thought he was talking about were the Proto-Indo-Europeans, which ironically would have included almost every race we can think of, right? So long story short, this Proto-Indo-European religion, there's not a lot on it, unfortunately. We're talking about a people that didn't have a writing system. So what we know is from second and third and fourth and like ninth hand accounts, but we know certain things about them. We know that they worshipped fire, that they began every ritual they did with lighting a sacred fire from a mirror or from glass, which the ancient Greeks did as well. So once you know the roots of so much of what we do, and the Druids did too. So that's one way. Another way was they had a sacred well. So the sacred well was not just a literal spring that did its own thing coming from the earth, which of course we see in every culture I can name, but it also was sometimes intentionally made. And just like the ancient Greeks to the Egyptians, to the Druids, to the Hindu religions, they would leave offerings in these wells. So they understood the elements and sacred trees. We have Yggdrasil in Norse mythology, but we also have the banyan tree in India. Same idea. The tree is the branches of life. It's the connection to all dimensions. It's grounding, but it's also connection to spirit. All of this comes from the Indo-Europeans. All of it. And the rule of 3 is not that different because 3 was considered the sacred number. That's why the Bible uses 3s. It's not because the Bible uses 3s. It's because the Indo-European religions did, and they needed to win those fellas over. So they said, guess what? We do the same thing. Same reason why, Jesus is sacrificed in December. That's because that's when the folk people of ancient Greece sacrificed Dionysius. So they said, well, that's Jesus actually.
Okay.
So all of these things really go back all the way to the Indo-Europeans, which is cool because it gives you more confidence, I think, when you're looking at I don't want, it's not really what you're doing, but when we kind of cherry pick, quote unquote, what we like from different practices, and we're like, I like the way the Druids use fire, but I like the way the Greeks use water. You might feel guilty or feel like you're cheating and somehow, but you're not. You're coming from the same roots. So these expressions are the same thing. They're coming from sometimes what looks on the outside as a vague perspective, a vague root. It's actually not. It's actually just that, the tree's roots. Have you seen a tree's roots or a plant's roots? They're all kinds of conglomerated in there. Yeah. They're just intermingled. And that's what makes it so healthy.
And I think it goes to show like we're more connected just as human beings than I think patriarchal culture wants us to believe. Patriarchy needs to divide. It needs to divide so it can't conquer. And when we start really looking at our history, our roots, our origins, we are so much more alike and so much more connected. And it's a shame that we hold on to these beliefs. Well, I'm better than you because of this. Well, nobody is really. There's no real, even in our current state of all this technology, no idea is a new idea or original idea, It all comes from someplace else. And sometimes it's so ancient that it really is part of our DNA.
And one of those things that feels ancient, it feels channeled. more than ancient. It feels primordial. It feels pre-human to experience, to read, to say, to, if you can say it in a group, is the Charge of the Goddess. Charge of the Goddess is a passage from Doreen Valiente's writings. And Doreen Valiente is the woman who wrote a lot of Wicca's teachings. So she was the first high priestess of Gerald Gardner, who invented Wicca. And she took a lot of what he did and improved on it. And she was a poet. She was a eloquent woman. So she was actually able to really make Wicca the poetic, ceremonial, beautiful religion that it became.
It is. Yeah.
So the Charge of the Goddess, now, it comes from Wicca, but you do not have to be Wiccan to enjoy it. Like I said, it feels very channeled. It feels like the purest expression of the goddess. And unfortunately, it can be quite hard to find the full text. I was fortunate enough to have a text that came down my lineage. So it's the text she wrote and taught to her followers, who taught to their followers, taught to their... So I'm 5 generations removed from Doreen Valiente, but that's still the text I'm reading. Whereas if you Google it, you might not find it. So I did find a fairly close PDF version, and I'm going to put that in our free community space on Rebel Mystic. So if you join the Broom Closet, you'll be able to download that and use it. But I encourage you to look on eBay for like first editions of her book or second editions, or some people actually scan in PDFs of her book. Like that's where to go, because unfortunately it gets pretty abridged because it's long. But in my practice, we're taught to memorize it. And it sounds like, we always say like there's no rights or wrongs. There's like, you shouldn't force your students to memorize stuff. Like, we believe that. But also I will say that my teacher was like, if you want to, it's what I was taught, but you don't have to. And I was like, no, I'm gonna, because I love it. And it's one of those texts that comes to you as you just are out in nature. You might hear a line of it in your head. It's just so beautiful.
Here's a nugget to really think about is, the more we know, the better we can express ourselves, the better we can understand things. And you don't have to know it to follow it or to make it part of your routine, but know enough so that if somebody mentions it, you can speak on it without sounding like a complete dumbass. That's why I hesitate on saying things, saying too much about certain things, because I know enough about it to be a part of the conversation, but I'm not going to come at you as an expert on it. And there's a lot of things that we should always kind of pull back on and say, okay, wait, I don't know enough about this. So let me find somebody who can speak a little bit more about it, who is more of an expert. And it's not that you're ignorant or that you're stupid. It's just that there's so much information out there. Like this path is so incredibly diverse. There's no way any one person can know it all. And you should not ever expect that of yourself, and nobody around you should expect that of you. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe for you, you read The Charge of the Goddess and it doesn't move you, but I don't know. I think it might. You might not want to memorize it, but like, I'm just going to read you one small part. This is the part that comes to me when I'm out in nature a lot. I, who am the beauty of the green earth and the white moon among the stars and the mystery of the waters, I call upon thy soul to arise and come unto me. For I am the soul of nature, who gives life unto the universe. From me all things proceed, and unto me all things must return. And before my face, beloved of gods and mortals, let thine innermost divine self be enfolded in the rapture of infinite joy.
Beautiful.
And that's not even a tenth of this thing. It's long, but it's beautiful.
It's huge.
Stunningly beautiful.
The Magic Kitchen podcast is funded and supported by thewitchwoodteahouse.com, offering a variety of hand-blended loose leaf teas as well as loose herbs for all of your ritual, spell work, wellness, and everyday enjoyment needs. If you would like to support this podcast while sipping a great cup of tea, head over to thewitchwoodteahouse.com and find the magic that's in store for you. Okay. So we started this podcast with Bright Blessings, Merry Meet, and those ones are fairly common. I think a lot of people still use them. I know we did when I was, first starting out. And those are just basic greetings, kind of like aloha, where you can use it for, or hello, you can use it for different things. So bright blessings could be a greeting. It could be a goodbye. And it could just be standalone as a blessing to someone who you want to bestow some positive energy on them.
Yeah. And with that too, we also hear blessed be. And there are a lot of different spell endings, things you say at the end to give it power. And these are just a matter of preference. And you can use them or you cannot. Right. So blessed be is a great one. It's kind of like if you wanted to extend it, you could too. You could be like, blessed be the fruits of this spell and the effects brought onto all of us, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these can be starting points. Yeah. They don't have to be what they are. Another one that's a good spell ending, so mote it be. I use that a lot. That's what I was taught. May it be so.
Yep, that's the one we use. May it be so, and so shall it be, and so shall it is are terms that we use in my coven to kind of solidify the spell, to acknowledge the ending, to release that energy. Yeah. And
I also see on social media older witches, instead of saying blessed be, or it's one of these, they'll actually just write out the acronyms. They'll say BB, or so mote be. They'll be like SMIB.
MM.
So that might be what you're seeing if you see that in some forums, especially Facebook. I see the older witches hanging out.
Yeah, I do. I use BB all the time.
You're not what I meant by the older witches.
But another one that I use is bright. The crones. Yeah, I'm not there yet. Another one that I use, like the bright blessings is another one that I use. So that one will be BB as well.
And I see this one a lot too. Like people will use this on social media if somebody's like, I'm doing this working for that. Or if you have energy to send to this, or, my so-and-so's in the hospital, can you send healing? They'll say, and so it is, so it shall be.
Yes.
It's like a way of saying. And another good one, as I will it to be done, it cannot be undone.
And that's just an acknowledgement that once you cast a spell, it's done. Like you can't bring that back necessarily. I've seen that one, at least in my practice, we usually used it for baneful magic. It followed up with like, and may it do its will without harming those that are innocent in the working. And that was just kind of an acknowledgement of like, we're sending this to this particular source, and it's not supposed to divert anywhere else, so that those who are don't get hurt by the wake of whatever's happening.
And if you're interested in a druid path, Obad, the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, they say Awen at the end of rites, and the Awen is a kind of like the Charge of the Goddess. It's like a prayer, from my understanding, that you can use in ritual. So they'll say the Awen at different events they host, at Grove meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one we wanted to talk about there is as above, so below. And I heard this in the context of witchcraft. It's the idea that, what's above us is what's below us, is ether, is spirit. Is,
as within, so without.
Yeah, exactly. And this comes from the Hermetic practices. We've talked a little bit about this before, but Hermeticism is like the root of magic in a lot of ways. It's Renaissance magic that was written down by supposedly an author, Hermes Trismegistus, and we think that maybe that might have been multiple people or an organization, and it's the foundation of Freemasonry, foundation of the Golden Dawn, the foundation of all of Aleister Crowley's various religions he put together, Theosophical Society, OTO, but also, witchcraft evolved out of those traditions. So, funnily enough, we see that as, okay, it evolved out of that, so it makes sense. People use as above, so below. But I have a friend in the Netherlands who I wrote a poem and I used the terminology in there, and she's like, why did you use this? I thought it was a witchcraft poem. It's like, yeah. And she said, well, Hermeticism's not witchcraft. Like in the Netherlands, in her practice at least, that is like a totally mutually exclusive conversation. Like you would not bring up Hermeticism within witchcraft. So, it's why it's nice to kind of know the origins of these terms, because you know, depending who you're talking to, their context might be so different. And then you can have a deeper conversation about those origins. So that was interesting because I've never met somebody from any part of the world who would have been shocked to see witchcraft and hermetic practice in the same sentence. But in the Netherlands, which it kind of makes sense, you know, the Dutch are known for being very like didactic and pragmatic and like honest. So they would kind of put those partitions perhaps, you know, but probably not all people in the Netherlands. So very interesting stuff. Always good to have these conversations. And like Leandra said, that's why it's good to have this base knowledge of what you're saying and doing and its origins, because you want to be able to contribute to that conversation. I read a quote somewhere recently that said, speak as if you are an authority on a subject, but listen as if you don't know anything.
I want to touch on some like, I don't know, misuses of some of the terminology that I see in the community. Like the idea of a tag lock in a spell. So, when I was looking at this, because I was like, what's a tag lock? Like I've never seen that before in the older teachings that I've been a part of. And what I've discovered is that a lot of creators are using tag lock as a circumvention in a spell, which are not exactly the same thing. So a circumvention is a technique you would use in a spell when you're adding an extra skill to the spell, like an extra barrier or an extra like dome of protection in a spell. And I've seen people use that as a tag lock, which they're a little bit different. So I do encourage you as a listener to go and research tag lock and spell circumvention so that you can really educate yourself on how to use these techniques. So for me, a circumvention, I have an entire spell that I shared in the Rebel Mystic community that lays out how to use a circumvention. So basically what it is a circumvention is you're adding an element to a spell so that any negative energy or negative kickback that might come to you from an outside source is bypassed and it goes around and it's infused into something else. So I use lemons and salt as an indicator. It's like an alarm system also. And it really helps like pull energy that would be directed directly at you or at your spell work and puts it into something else. So when you see and hear these like obscure seeming terminologies being thrown around, really get down and like research what that means. Now it could be that certain traditions just use different terminology for the same thing, and that's acceptable. But in my training, tag locks are different than circumventions. And that's how I teach. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these obscure terms for spell work and skills and certain resources we use in spell work.
There's a lot of terms like that. Like we talk about petitions to deities, and a petition is usually asking for their help on something. Whereas if you're writing a simple dedication, maybe there's a dedication you use each time you're at your altar. And that might start the same as a petition. Usually, and this again, maybe it's just my teaching, but it's a very like praising kind of language. You know, Artemis, she of the fawn and the rabbit, and she who protects women and children, the beautiful and honorable, you know, those kind of epithets that you might add to her name, like as you're calling her, that might show up in the beginning of a petition, but a dedication might just stop there. And I think gratitude, you know, expressing gratitude is almost always part of both. But, you know, just some of those terminologies that you might come across. That's the difference between a petition and a dedication. There's also like invoking versus evoking. We've talked about that a little bit here too. There's so many different terms that we, you know, could drone on about, but I think this conversation goes better when you're one-on-one, when we can speak. So I know when we launch this episode, once it airs, the Wednesday after, we will have one of our table talks where we will sit down with our community and go into detail and answer your questions about these and give you a broader perspective. So I encourage you, like, join us there. Join us in these live talks after an episode airs, or you can join the community and get the recordings too. So you get a broader perspective of these
topics, because we're really teaching here is what we're doing. And you can't teach everything in a half hour or an hour show.
And if you join the free space, we're posting question Q&A posts there. So after each episode airs, we post the episode topic and we get your follow-up questions. So if there are other terms that you're struggling with, leave your questions there because we might not have thought of all of them. So another thing I just wanted to remind you all is we did an episode with a demonologist, and she introduced us to the difference between bindings, crossings, cursings, and hexings, which collectively we might call baneful magic or execration magic. So that episode was season 4, episode 9 with S. Connolly. So I recommend going back to that as well if you're going down that rabbit hole of
that was a good
types
episode.
Of baneful magic. Yeah, it was so good. And she's had some really good books come out even since. She is like, I don't know how she writes so much. She's good though. They're all good. So
yeah, I like them.
Yeah. Are you enjoying the show? If you are, we'd really appreciate a 5-star review. It helps us to reach more listeners like you and to keep doing the Magic Kitchen podcast. Thank you. So I wanted to end with just a couple other, similar to the threefold law. These are more practice specific. So, take what you want from them, but you will probably hear them a lot. So you know what you're hearing. So one is the Wiccan Rede. And this, I don't know if it still is, but when I was first becoming a witch, I was really I want a sign that says this. Everybody had signs, T-shirts, bumper stickers.
Had it
I
in
don't
your
know.
BOS.
So yeah. You write it out in big bubble letter font. 8 words the Wiccan Rede fulfill, and it harm none. Do what ye will.
Yep.
So that's it, and it's so that's one of those phrases. I still I'm not Wiccan. I never was even drawn to that path, but it just was one of those first things you read and you're like, ooh, it's from an ancient grimoire. It's very inner child friendly.
It's so magical.
Yeah. And it evolved out of Crowley, who, like we said, Aleister Crowley is not, don't leave your kids in a room with him. But
he's not the best role model.
Unfortunately, he just has to keep coming up because he did lay those foundations.
A lot. Yeah.
And you can see his ethical issues even in this, because the Wiccan Rede evolved from it. He says, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Yes.
That was his belief. And I like that the Wiccan Rede adds to it, and it harm none, because now we've talked about and it harm none, and that's what we're always referencing when we say that. We're talking about, the complexity of that phrase. Because sure, the Wiccan Rede is 8 words, but that's just not enough. And the extended Rede, there's a whole scholarly and academic conversation about the Great Rede. It's a longer sort of ethos that was published. And the man who published it claimed that he found the original. And it was just this whole thing. But if you're curious about the Wiccan Rede, you'll come across mentions of the Great Rede. And it's much like Margaret Murray's studies on the 6 million people that were killed in the witch trials, for actual witchcraft like you and I practice. That's not true either. There's a lot of sensationalizing that happened in the early half of the 20th century that is unfortunately pervasive even in modern new books, because they're not sure. People aren't always aware how much of it was discredited or, how much of it was admittedly made up by some of the people who wrote about it. So, so it's always good we always say it, but it's good to go back, do more research, figure out the origins of certain things you practice or believe or do or words you use. And at the same time, don't get too overwhelmed with when you hit roadblocks and you hit dead ends on what you think something means, because it's your intent. If your intent is pure, if you're approaching what you're doing with perfect love and perfect trust, you're going to be golden. Your witchcraft is going to work, and you're going to have a fulfilling path.
Yeah, there is a point where you have to kind of pull back and go, okay, whoa. I got the gist of it, and now I need to make it work for me in my path, and that's perfectly acceptable. Merry meet,
merry part, and merry meet again.
Thank you for joining us on the Magic Kitchen podcast. Please visit my website, leandrawitchwood.com, for news, information, and more episodes.
I'm Elyse Wells, and I can be found at Seeking Numina on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and seekingnumina.com. That's Seeking, Numina.